So distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on Embrace Earth, Soil Health as a Foundation to Sustainable Food Systems. My name is Thoraya Triki. I'm the Director of the Sustainable Production Market Institution Division at the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And today I'll be moderating this important session. So you all know that soil health is an extremely important topic and an enabler for food system transformation and the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goal agenda, supporting climate adaptation and mitigation, soil productivity, food security, but also farmer resilience and biodiversity. Today, we put together a very important and actually an impressive panel to come together and as one group working on this important topic, to improve our understanding, share different views from different perspectives with the idea to build a consensus about the need to scale up improvement and action for soil improvement, but also to initiate a call of action to the global community. So without further ado, and to set up the stage, I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Martin Frick, who is the Deputy of the UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Food Summit System 2021. Mr. Frick served before as the Senior Director of UN Climate Change, as Program Director for former Secretary General Kofi Annan's Foundation, Director for Climate Change at the FAO. He was also the German representative for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs at the UN General Assembly, and served as the European Union's lead negotiator in the establishment of the UN Human Rights Council. So, Martin, I mean, for us, it's normal to start with the vision of the UN. We are about 1 week from the Food Summit system. And I hope that over the next 5 minutes, you would be able to share with us the UN vision for the future and the messages that will be coming from the Food Summit system to the COP20 and to the world about agriculture. So over to you.
Thank you, Thoraya, for the kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. 6 days to go to the Food System Summit, the first food system summit the UN has ever organized. And it's time to recall why it's a food system summit, because the vision of this summit is quite simply to turn our food systems from often an impediment to the achievement of the 2030 agenda, to a driver of the 2030 agenda. This is not only about SDG 2. Not to relativize SDG 2, which is supremely important with 161 million additional people hungry. But this is about all 17 SDGs. And if we look at our food systems from a systemic lens, then we see that this is the biggest provider of livelihoods on the planet. If you take everything together, people who are dependent from people in food systems, everyone who somehow makes a living from food systems, you have a staggering 4.5 billion people. You got 3 billion people in the world who cannot afford healthy diets and who are in the current COVID pandemic most affected. And these are the very people, again, who are producing our food. In environmental terms, our food systems are basically contributing to around 1/3 of the global emissions, which makes it the single biggest sector when it comes to emission. Food systems are the biggest killer of biodiversity. It's the biggest user of fresh water, and the CO2 emissions, or the CO2 equivalent emissions of food systems, are so big that if food waste would be a country, it would be the 3rd largest carbon emitter on this planet. So what this summit is trying to do is to bring transformational change, and it does so with a very unusual system. Just to recall that our 5 action tracks were not led, as it would be normal in the UN process, by ambassadors or by ministers. They have been led by civil society leaders, experts in the field, such as Joao, who is on this call. So we gave the thematic discussions first and foremost in the hands of experts. And the second thing that we have done is to decentralize the discussion to 147 nations so far, who have accepted our invitation to run National Food System Summit dialogues, but we also open to independent food system summit dialogues so as to bring in the voices, particularly from the ground, from indigenous, from landless people, from workers, from peasants, to really hear from everybody. And this has created something which I think we can all be very proud of. And that is a change in the way people talk and discuss around food systems, away from an issue that is only for experts and ministers and ministries of agriculture, towards a discussion that all of government and indeed all of society needs to have, with our business leaders, with our civil society leaders, with our indigenous leaders, to get it collectively right. So Thursday next week, you will see not only a speakers list of more than 140 heads of state defining and expressing their national plans for food system transformation. You will also hear from financial leaders, from business leaders, from civil society, from everybody, because this summit, and let me conclude with that, is not the end point, although it was 1.5 years, very intensive process to prepare. This is really the starting point to get the 9 last harvests we have before 2030 right. And it's great to be here. Soils definitely is a topic that brings all the systemic elements together, from health to climate to biodiversity. And this is maybe a prime example for what a summit systems approach can and should actually mean. And with that, thank you very much, and back to you, Thoraya.
Thank you very much, Martin, for sharing with us these very important messages. I think it makes us all anxious to see actually the outcome of those summits. And thank you for reminding that the food summit system, which is an unprecedented one, is not the end. It's the beginning of a long action. I mean, maybe as a nice transition, now that we have heard the UN vision with the food system, we thought it would be also very important to bring in the voice of the business, of the private sector. And our Mr. Peter Becker, who would be our next speaker, was a natural candidate. I was personally following closely a lot of his passionate interventions. He is been leading the World Business Council for Sustainable Development since 2012. As you all know, WBCSD is a global CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses working together to accelerate the transition to a sustainable world. So Peter, as I said earlier, I've been following some of your passionate interventions over the past 18 months and seeing how you've been leading also the council. Would you like to share with us maybe some thoughts about your role at WBCSD on how you've been central in driving business action for the UN Food Summit system, and how you're actually mobilizing food and businesses in order to foster the food summit transformation that Martin has underscored. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Thoraya. It's great to be with everybody. And let me, before I say anything, compliment Martin. It's quite amazing how good you still look after all the hard work that you had to put in to get the Food System Summit almost at the starting line. So well done. I don't want to speak so much about WBCSD this afternoon. I'm at the moment predominantly employed as a member of the advisory committee to the Food System Summit. And given that it's only 6 days away, that's probably a much more interesting topic to talk about. You know, we all know the world is facing 3 challenges: the climate emergency, the loss of nature, and mounting inequality. And there is no other system in the world where these 3 challenges come together as in the food system. So it's actually quite amazing that for the first time ever, the world will meet next week to talk about food in a systemic level, to really drive progress. And the good thing about the Food System Summit is we've been able to create a pretty much agreed vision for where the food system needs to go. It needs to be an equitable, net zero and nature positive food system that nourishes all people with healthy diets. So let me repeat that because it's important: an equitable, net zero and nature positive food system that nourishes all people with healthy diets. That's really what we're trying to achieve. And next week, indeed, is a starting point. We've worked with governments, civil society, academia. We've worked with farmers, with youth, with women, with indigenous people, and of course, business has had a key role to play. In business, we've created a business declaration, which has now been signed by up to over 230 companies and company leaders from across all of the value chain, which provides really strong science-based commitments on what business can do to unlock the food systems transformation that we now so urgently need. And clearly it's essential, and that's the topic of this afternoon's conversation, that we talk about the health of soils. Meeting the goal of healthy soils is going to be a critical driver for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It supports nature, it supports climate, food security, and livelihoods. And as such, investing in soils will provide incredible returns and benefits to companies, helping to achieve the goals of productivity, of business continuity, of resilience, and of meeting net zero targets, zero land conversion, and equitable farmer livelihoods. So in short, we must invest in our soils and treat them as a foundational asset. And I'm sure Wiebe will pick up on this point when he speaks. There's going to be new mechanisms, whether it's voluntary carbon markets, public-private financing. We see, and that's the great gift from the Food System Summit, that one of the 5 action areas has been identified to boost nature-based solutions. And obviously, soil health, regenerative agriculture, agroecology are central themes there. Now, we welcome and support the Food System Summit Coalition of the Action for Soil Health, which is going to be an important initiative to drive this all forward. So looking forward, I want to leave you with the message that we've created a unique global conversation about the need to transform food systems. Soil is at the heart of that debate. I really want to call on everybody on the line. Do join the Food System Summit next week. Put your voice in. Echo the messages all across the internet, because this is the biggest battle that we have out there. And I thank you all very much for your support. Over to you back, Toria.
Thank you very much, Peter. Again, another passionate introduction. As I said, these first messages are meant to help us set the framework for our conversation this afternoon. So we heard from a representative of the United Nations. We heard from a representative from a business organization. And we thought that it's a natural thing for us to also have at the third intervention a banker, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are also expected to do the heavy lifting in terms of financing. So our third speaker would be a representative from a leading bank who has been quite pioneering a lot of intervention in the agriculture sector, Mr. Wiebe Drager, who is the chairman of the Rabobank Managing Board. He's a strong advocate for sustainable food system transformation, having set up the Rabo Carbon Bank this year. So, Mr. Drager, you have been really an outspoken, passionate, and defender of the Food Summit system, and particularly emphasizing the need to focus on soil health, on finance. Can you share with us a little bit how is soil play? What role does soil health play in Rabobank? Over to you.
And thank you, Martin and Peter, for that introduction and this kind intro to my talk, which really is in line with the introduction of Martin talking about the Food System Summit that is upon us. And Peter, with his significant role in getting private sector engagement on the Food System Summit agenda. I would like to talk about soil, but before I do, I would like to welcome a fellow speaker later on in the program, Michael Jorganil. He's new into the role of being CEO of FMO, and I would like to welcome him to the scene of being a fighter for food and the sustainability of it. Let me talk about soil. I think if I can corner a phrase, the soil is the battery for life. And let me talk about dividends that soil plays and healthy soils play. I think there's a triple dividend that soils bring to life. And I just want to underscore them because they really are the lever of positive change in the food supply chain. Sometimes the change in the food supply chain comes across as a big, humongous task that seems so far and complex that everybody says, well, that's too far away from me. Also, because we only got 9 crops left until 2030, it sort of feels daunting. But at the heart of any transition is the farmer. And in the backyard of any farmer is the soil that he or she plows. Let me talk about the dividends that those soils provide to the world. It's a triple dividend game from the soil. First of all, if we have a healthy soil, we are getting more productive outcomes. So it's economically viable for the farmer to have a healthy soil. It's a long-term change, but it creates more productive, higher yield crops for the farmer, and therefore more nutritious food for consumers. The second dividend is actually a collection of dividends. The dividend is in better biodiversity with better soils, better water management with better soils, higher nutritional quality, more resilience against extreme weather, and it therefore provides a rich contribution to all the SDGs that Martin was talking about. The third dividend is a crucial dividend as well. The third dividend is that this healthy soil is actually a perfect place to store carbon, to reduce footprint, but also to reduce the total emissions of carbon into the atmosphere. Soil simply is the battery for life. And the farmer is at the frontier. However, it's not enough to point towards the farmer, to help the farmer. We need a multi-stakeholder approach. And I'm so happy that next week's gathering brings together, obviously, the various players and stakeholders from the private sector, from the non-governmental part, but more importantly, the governmental angle, because we really need a multi-stakeholder angle to get the soil health vital back on the agenda, because the alignment of incentives needs to be there, and all the players locally, regionally, but also the food supply chains that the private sector plays a crucial role in need to be aligned. We need governance support to provide the right incentive frameworks. And there are fantastic regional examples already that I'd like to applaud. And one of them is the Living Soils of Americas initiative, which Dr. Lal, who will be speaking later in this program, listen well to him. Dr. Lal, he is one of the leading initiative takers in that area. But there are some really governments engaged in this that really commit to soil health, like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Costa Rica, a lightning example for the world of multi-stakeholder engagement. We're also pleased to see the European Commission, who has underscored the importance of science to understand the role of soil into this space. We as Rabobank also want to step up, and we've set up our initiative around the Carbon Bank, which essentially tries to create a platform of trust and incentive to the farmer to get the reward that he or she deserves when he or she applies more regenerative farming practices, by measuring the CO2 that's being absorbed, by giving it credit, and then to reward the farmer for that, and therefore creating a very strong incentive for the farmer to change. We also apply innovative solutions together with technology players to provide smallholder farmers with access to this benefit. Under the initiative called ACORN, where we use satellite technology to measure the CO2 captured in trees that smallholder farmers plant on their farms. This gives them access to this incentive as well. And of course, by adding our knowledge and research base together with the FMO white paper that we produced around the soil health topic. Soil is the battery for life. The farmer sits at the gate, and we need to align multi-stakeholders to give the right incentive. And I want to call on the Food System Summit attendance next week to really give this a prominent place in the agenda for the future of the change of a more sustainable food system in the world. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to next week.
Thank you very much for this very important points, and also for sharing with us some of this exciting initiative that Rabobank has been launching to address the issue. So now that we have heard from our keynote speakers, I would like to actually zoom into I would say, the science and the policy angle of the issue of soil health. And I couldn't think of better panelists than our two ladies that we would be speaking over the next few minutes. I'm referring to Lee Winooki and Annette Schneegers. Lee is a soil system scientist at World Agroforestry ICRA, based in Nairobi, Kenya. She has over 15 years of experience working in the global tropics on key issues around land restoration, sustainable agriculture, intensification, and soil carbon dynamics. Annette Schneegans is a senior expert at the European Commission, Director General for Agriculture, Rural Development, Unit Research and Innovation, responsible for research programming in the area of crop production and natural resources. As Secretariat for the Mission Board Soil Health and Food, she's closely involved in the development of the Horizon Europe mission to improve soil health. So you have probably understood that we have someone covering the policy and someone covering the science, and it will be very interesting because I decided that we'll be asking them the same question and see how from different angles we can get to different or maybe similar responses. So maybe I can start with you, Lee. We have made great advances in soil management and monitoring over the years. What are the next steps to implement at scale these on the ground? What is needed from the different actors involved? Thank you, over.
Great, thank you so much for that question and for the opportunity to join this distinguished panel. As was so eloquently stated by the opening speakers, yes, the world is suffering from several global crises, which are often connected through land, making soil stewardship so important. So as the previous speakers just said, yes, investments in soil health will be critical to reverse degradation, increase food and nutrition security, to realize the SDGs, to reach ecosystem restoration and climate change targets. So yes, I agree, we do have solutions to soil management, but we still have a ways to go in terms of rethinking our global food systems, from having a sole goal of productivity to acknowledging the positive role agricultural systems can have to mitigate climate change, as Vive just talked about, through carbon storage, increasing below and above ground biodiversity, and providing equitable incomes. So as I mentioned, soil stewardship will be critical. So to get at the heart of your question, in order to scale soil health solutions on the ground, we have to address key barriers. We only have two. Let me just talk about three barriers. One, economic incentives to farmers who implement healthy soil practices on their farm must be there. And these practices must be tailored to their needs and context. Unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. Second, multi-stakeholder groups need to move from platforms to action. And we need to aim to synergize, to work together across these initiatives to fill existing gaps, because we know there are existing gaps. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So allow me to follow up on Peter's statement. Within the UN Food Systems Summit, for example, we have tried to do just that through the Coalition of Action for Soil Health. This aims to improve soil health globally by addressing critical implementation, monitoring, policy, and finally, public and private investment barriers that constrain farmers from adopting and scaling healthy soil practices. And my third point is what is really dear and what the last 15 years of my career is really focused around is generating new evidence. There's a lot more we need to consider beyond yields, and therefore monitoring systems need to capture the complexity beyond just inputs and outputs. So we have spent, almost 2 decades developing and implementing such systems where we combine systematic field surveys of soil and land health with remote sensing and assisted citizen science to track ecosystem restoration practices on agricultural land with farmers. These data provide key insights and evidence that allow us to further tailor and scale locally appropriate interventions. Also, as the last speaker just said, very important to quantify the effects of these practices on soil organic carbon to really be able to spatially map these key indicators such as soil organic carbon at scales relevant to stakeholders. These data allow us to then inform policy, inform decision-making, But let me just close in 2 final points. These advances have not happened by coincidence, right? They are the result of sustained research efforts dedicated to working alongside farmers to encourage innovation, but also for us scientists to adapt our monitoring methods and techniques to capture the variability. So in essence, to sum up my answer, this is really about translating science into action, which requires that all actors are open to working together to develop solutions to transform our agricultural systems to benefit nature and people. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lee, for this very passionate intervention. And by the way, I'm very jealous of your background. So Annette, you heard the science response from Lee. What are your thoughts? I'm very keen to hear your reaction to the same question. Over to you.
Yes, I cannot add so much more to what Lee has said. I mean, she covered it so nicely. I will probably just give it a twist. I'm here sitting with 2 hats as a research funder and from within a policy department for agriculture. So the question was really, in a way, how can we translate better what we know into practice? So as Lee has said, of course, we still have gaps in our knowledge. We still need to know more, but we already know so much that we should apply in better ways. The issue is, however, where has this knowledge been generated, and where have the proposed solutions been tested? Often we see it's not there where we need the solutions. Phil Pardee has created this fantastic map, I think, in the context of agricultural research, where he showed where we have the main research institutes in the world and we have the main needs for applying this knowledge. And this map is totally distorted. So the issue is now how to get knowledge really to the ground. And in my view, we need to look into creating at really large scale and very systematically the spaces where researchers and practitioners, this means the users of the research, work together to test solutions and adapt them to the local context. So we are really effectively talking about doing research in new ways, sharing information and exchanging knowledge in new ways. And to underpin this, I would like to give 2 examples from Europe. So here in Europe, we have been tested in the agricultural domain, how participatory research can work. It's a mechanism that we call the European Innovation Partnership for Agriculture, where we test what we call this multi-actor approach. It has been quite successful and has resulted in bringing about 50% of new, I would say, new type of people into research, people that had never done research or been engaged in research before. And we're now about to launch a mission in the area of soil health and food. And a central element of this mission is the creation of a large network of living labs and lighthouses. We're talking about something of about 1,000 sites, 1,000 or 2,000 sites across Europe in the next 7 years, where researchers, farmers, advisors, and actors across the value chain will hopefully work together to translate knowledge from research and deploy solutions. And we see this as a missing link between knowledge from science and the uptake of this knowledge on the ground. But of course, to be successful, we need now to get really out to reach the actors from various sectors across land users and value chains. And the coalition just mentioned by Lee is hopefully also, I would say, a facilitator for us to reach out to this huge community that is needed to make changes happen.
Thank you, Annette. And your intervention is already, incentivizing me to ask you a second question. This time I'll start with you rather than Lee. So in your views, given the 2 hats that you are wearing, what do you see as potential opportunities to include soil health in the various policies? And at what level should this policy action be taken? Over to you.
Yes, I should probably say that in the EU, so soil protection, the sustainable management of soils and soil restoration is already directly or indirectly targeted by a number of policies and legislative frameworks. For example, for agriculture, climate, pollution, and waste. But as you see, having said that, there's no framework specifically dealing with soils. Soils and soil health is recognized as a transversal issue which cuts across various policy domains. It's effectively integrated. In addition, we're going to update in the coming months an EU soil strategy. But the question is this framework effective enough to encourage sustainable soil management? And to answer this question, we need to have in place a systematic view of the state of soils and the changes over time to see whether the policies are effective, whether measures are effective. And this is, I think, the main bottleneck. It does not help, to set policy targets if we cannot track the progress towards these targets. We have a system, of course, for sampling soils all over the EU. This is called Lucas. But only a few member states have active monitoring programs. And often these data across countries cannot be compared. And at global level, the same applies. Lee has also mentioned this, that monitoring is a key issue for everything, management of soils, monitoring, and policies. So my main plea would be in relation to policies that monitoring is key to assess the effectiveness of our policies and develop them further. And my big hope is that countries globally can commit more firmly to setting up soil monitoring programs, such as ones you have already for air, for water, and work towards harmonizing and exchanging soil data. And for this, the Global Soil Partnership is a useful tool that hopefully will boost and incentivize to work more closely together on this.
Well, thank you very much, Annette. So, Lee, do you share this view about the need for monitoring, a holistic view that Annette is promoting? Over to you.
Absolutely. And if I could have one wish, I think it would be, as a scientist, that we have opportunities to leverage these data and evidence to inform decision-making and policies. And I'm optimistic about opportunities to include soil health in policies. Soil is a natural integrator. I think we heard that already from previous speakers. And of course, it's already included in agricultural policies, but now we're seeing more soil is an important carbon sink. And so I would like to see more policies, including soil health, around ecosystem restoration. And yes, I'm optimistic that we can include access and these data into policies and informed decision making.
Thank you very much, Lee. And with these words of wisdom, I will be closing this mini panel on the science versus the policy, and we'll continue with our program. I think that we are giving you greater incentive and interest in the topic, underscoring the importance of soil health, to borrow the words of earlier, the battery, actually, as he called it. So without further ado, I would like now to give the floor to our next speaker, Mr. Michael Jorganil, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name properly, from FMO. So Michael joined FMO in September 2021 from international consulting firm called Bain & Company, where he was a partner in the Amsterdam office, as well as the firm's global lead for sustainable finance. Michael helped to transform banks, insurers towards inclusion of sustainability in their core business, and to develop impact investing strategies and innovative solutions in sustainable finance. Michael, why is this event so important, FMO, for you to be sitting on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock talking about soil health? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Thuraya. Well, there are two reasons why this event is so important for us. First of all, the problems we're facing are so big that we cannot take this on alone. So we need to collaborate, and we already do with many of you, and there's much more to come. So I'm very happy on that end to have so much inspirational talks and scientific talks. I'll try to make it a little bit more practical going forward. The second reason why this event is so important for us is because agriculture is key to FMO. We are one of the few development finance institutes with a specific agri-focus. And people in the developing world have the most amount of soil, and they face the biggest climate change risk, as most of us know. But globally, over 550 million farms exist, of which over 450 million are small family farms. And there are certain farming practices with a high risk of soil health deterioration impacting farmers directly and also contributing to climate risk. So that's really an area of attention, and for us, a very important opportunity to improve practices and kind of stop the degradation of soil health. Hence, also we invest kind of 500 million euros annually in agri worldwide, where about 50% of that is in primary production. So we as FMO, we understand the importance of that relationship between soil health and also climate change mitigation and adaptation. Now, you said before, Rabobank is a bank, we're a bank, but I think the role of FMO is to be more than just a bank. What does it mean? We really try to kind of go into higher risk areas beyond where commercial banks can go for high impact projects, long tenures, and in high risk countries. And of course, we use a mix of private equity and debt, but I think the point that we use blended finance is very important, from the Dutch government, European Commission, UK government funds, to go really into high impact projects where new ventures are being taken, where we introduce or we experiment with things around climate resilience, adaptation projects, forestry, and so on. And we link that to TA and to CD grants to improve the supply and sustainability agenda. And I'll give a couple of examples later on. So also here, partnerships are so important. As again, we don't do this alone. We work with NGOs, consultants, certification bodies, and universities. Let me give you two examples here. On one hand, there's an example of a water stewardship partnership in Peru, where we're helping our clients to understand sustainable water use, which is more easily said than done, and get certified to improve their practices. We also work with leading university, Wageningen, on climate resilient agri-sourcing in Africa, for instance, to explore climate change impact in certain crops, how to best mitigate climate change, improve crop resistance, productivity, and thereby improve soil health. So there's a lot is going on where we take a role beyond just being a bank and simply putting in money out there. Now, how do we then actually apply all that knowledge that we gain to protect health and improve soil health? So very important is, and to the point of monitoring that mentioned before, we really screen very thoroughly potential and current investments, applying a rigorous E&S performance framework to it with two objectives. On one hand, obviously, we want to avoid further soil health deterioration. So we don't invest in projects where it's really unsustainable practice, but basically more important is number two, where you apply measures that maintain, restore, and improve soil health. So for instance, if we detect poor practices, we talk to the investee and we make sure that they are required to change it to sustainable practices. We monitor, there we go, implementation of good agriculture practices through our investments. And very important, we provide support. So we're not just leaning back and say, hey, you need to do better, but we provide support, financial, of course, but also technical, to help our investees adopt those more sustainable practices. And I think that's very important, with the end goal of, on one hand, reduce erosion, rationalize use of agrochemicals, and on the positive end, make sure that soil structure, organic matter in soil is improved, enhance carbon sequestration, for instance, but also improve biodiversity, because we're talking about climate change, but also the whole point of biodiversity is super important. To all of this, we have about over 50 sustainability professionals, and they focus on agri and E&S. But again, we do this together in a lot of partnerships, also with the next two speakers. And I think it's interesting, they'll talk about more of them themselves, but Sucafina, for instance, has been a client since 2014 with FMO, leading a coffee merchant. And it's interesting to see that we supported Sucafina towards a more proactive engagement of those farmers. I mentioned there's so many small farmers that deploy these practices, and we have a kind of a farmer hub program, which is linked to a year-round engagement, physical and digital, with smallholder farmers in 6 countries. And we're supporting them to diversify their income, to move into other crops as well, and help them in that way really improve the whole health system and make sure that they are themselves more sustainable and their practices are more sustainable. Hence, we fight climate change and inequality at the same time. I think another example, and I'll keep it short, is the second speaker, Ledesma, in Argentina, focusing on sugar but doing a lot more. And here we are assisting Ledesma to develop a soil organic matter monitoring program. Again, the monitoring is so important. I really try to help them through our finance, but also through our content and knowledge to further improve their needed infrastructure and land management changes. And I'm very proud to be able to support these two companies, great companies, and happy that they're here to further share what their practices are doing.
Thank you very much, Michael, for reminding us of the catalytic role that the FMO and the other GFIs are expected to play. I can relate to that because my employer, IFAD, is also an international financial institution, and we are also in the same business. So as you rightly said, we wanted this event to be really reflecting the perspective of multiple stakeholders, and it would have been really odd to speak about soil health without having the voice of the farmers and make sure that we have also an inclusive process. So our next two speakers will be representing farmers. The first speaker is Max Viello, who is the managing director of Rwakov, a coffee expert company based in Rwanda since 1996. They work closely with farmers in an integrated operation model from farm to FOB, and they sell green coffee to roasters around the globe. The company has been increasingly more committed to identify ways to reduce their carbon emissions. So, Max, I will be shooting questions as you because I'm very interested actually, and Michael got me even more interested in your model. Can you explain why, as Green Coffee Expert Company, you're now more focused on and ready to invest on carbon capture and soil? We heard earlier that it makes business case, but it would be good to hear from you. Why soil health an important topic for Sukafina? And can you tell us more about the context you are working in green coffee exported in Rwanda, and specifically how improved soil health can positively impact the sustainability of farmers' businesses? Over to you.
Thanks, Faraya. It's a privilege to be on this event. Thanks everyone for their time, and Giovanni for doing the slides. As you mentioned, I'm managing director of Rwakov. It's part of Sukafina. It's a global coffee merchant based in Geneva, Switzerland. It trades around 1 in every 22 cups of coffee. Maybe you can change slide, Giovanni. Thank you very much. Sukafina's footprint, don't be overwhelmed by the amount of the world we seem to be covering. We're not trying to take it over. That's not part of the corporate strategy as far as I understand. Giovanni, next slide, if you don't mind. So soil health is a crucial driver of whether farming businesses can work profitably today and tomorrow. Furthermore, regenerative agricultural practices, as mentioned by the chairman of Rabobank, are an opportunity for us to store carbon. As Michael said just previously, building partnerships to achieve these goals are crucial, and farmers are the principal actors here, and without de-risking their investments, significant behavior change is difficult or almost impossible. Farm profitability should be mentioned side by side with regenerative practices. And I'd like to present a snapshot of the smallholder coffee supply chain and some key numbers for context before diving into soil. So Rwanda is a country of 12 million people. That's roughly 2.5 million people that depend on coffee for 40% of their cash incomes. Rwandan coffee farmers harvest from Jan to June, are paid spot cash against delivery. Their bargaining power and price discovery are supported by a minimum price set by the national regulator and adjusted depending on international coffee price movements. Next slide, Giovanni, thanks. Within the Rwakov operation, a significant amount of our volume is very integrated. Simply put, we sell to roaster clients, many are brand owners, and buy from 25,000 growers via 22 factories that we own and operate. Our focus since the very start of the operation has been on efficiency. So our extension services and input programs have largely been driven by a need to obtain voluntary standards like Rainforest Alliance in order to sell to certain clients. More recently, however, since I'd say 2018, we've been retooling the operation with the goal of understanding how can we make smallholder coffee farming more profitable. Perhaps the low-hanging fruit is always to sell better. And as a group, Socafina has made massive inroads with clients who are prepared to pay premiums for quality, data, and sustainable practices. What's been more difficult is retraining ourselves to understand farmer choices, capacities, and constraints. But with a greater understanding of these, we can create a list of desirable behaviors and accompanying incentives designed to improve the profitability of farming activity and ultimately also our bottom line. Alongside ongoing projects ranging from carbon footprint mapping to creating 15,000 bank accounts to cash flow loans for 600 growers, we've recently invested $5 per grower on baseline surveying, encompassing 31 questions, as well as GPS polygon mapping, plot photography, and lastly, taking and analyzing 55,000 plot soil samples. Next slide, Giovanni. So who are the growers? Baseline survey results today are not surprising. I've listed some of the results here. 85% of growers have gross annual cash revenues of between $300 and $550. Half of the growers are above 55 years old. 1 in 5 don't have a telephone, and at least a third don't have electricity. Most growers are cultivating less than 0.3 hectares. And of the 25,000 registered growers, only 5 cultivate more than 10 hectares. Overall, the variation between farm practices are fairly small. However, we can create some interesting segments. But today, let's look at one grower who represents a lot of average data points. She's an actual farmer that sells to us, but today we'll call her Francine. Francine never went to school, but numerically literate according to our survey. She has a very low level of trust in banks, but a very high level of trust in the manager of the factory who she sells to. But she doesn't know their name and she's never met them. She doesn't have a mobile phone, but would like to receive product and service offers from Rockoff, as well as technical advice. Within our household, 6 of the 7 people are adults. Next slide. So from Francine's 4 plots, we took and analyzed 4 individual samples using handheld scanners. The overall results show 2 main problem areas: low soil pH and low organic carbon levels. In short, both can reduce the level of nutrients available for use by the plants. I'd add that other aspects of her soil look reasonably good. Next slide. To fix the main issues, Francine would be advised to invest $115 in composting and liming. Based on the best data we have, a reasonable expectation would be that if this investment is sustained over a number of years to hedge weather and disease risk, her yields should at least double. With prices being constant, she would see $200 in additional coffee revenue. However, Francine wasn't aware of her soil acidity problem. She didn't know that 300 kg of lime would be the solution. Furthermore, her existing cash income is already fully committed, leaving her with the sole option to borrow from local co-op banks at 26% per annum. This option could still yield a benefit, but only if the lime and compost has an immediate impact, which is unlikely. So next slide. Ultimately, these issues faced by smallholders can be grouped into 3 buckets. So first, no access to multi-year affordable financing. Second, no one is collecting good data for KYC for banks to use. And third, growers lack the technical knowledge to understand what they should be doing, even if they had access to affordable finance. Stepping back, 3 stakeholders can, and some are making progress to mitigate these issues and find wins. On our side as an origin aggregator, investments must be made in gathering good data that's usable for grower agronomy advice and also for sharing with banks to de-risk and facilitate lending. Furthermore, we need to look at shortening supply chains for inputs and services the growers need, but are paying too much for or don't have access to. For banks that lend to origins, are KPIs in place for your partners, your bank partners in origins, in terms of headcount of smallholders banked or products and services being uptaken? In Rwanda, we borrow most of our working capital locally, although Michael mentioned that FMO financed a lot of our assets in the country. So thanks, Michael, FMO. I'd say that none of the 16 local banks have made real headway with retailing to smallholders. They're not interested in banking this profile of client. Lastly, for roaster clients, a lot of the soil and profitability challenges can be partially mitigated by buying organic. However, roasters should check spending claims made by Origin in relation to organic premiums and practices. And here, blockchain platforms like Farmer Connect can and should play a role in storing claims for verification. We should acknowledge that over the last 2 years, a number of high-profile brands have made very strong carbon commitments. Maybe coffee is a little bit different in this regard, which is very encouraging for smallholder supply chains. However, emphasis within those claims should be placed on buying carbon removal credits coming directly from the coffee supply chain. And in that way, like organic, smallholders could directly be rewarded for good behavior adoption. And just to conclude with the last slide, so what's the relationship moving forward for carbon and smallholders? It's clear that soil improvement via regenerative agricultural methods is likely to have positive implications for carbon sequestration. And some institutions, many on this call, have done an amazing job to facilitate farmer access to voluntary carbon credit schemes. I'd, however, encourage those at the forefront of innovation to keep making cheap, accurate, remote measurement as affordable as possible. For 95% of Burundi and Rwanda coffee growers, we can't use the off-the-shelf remote above-ground biomass measurements that exist today, as the plots cultivated are just too small. And believe you, we've tried. So why should solutions go further upstream to smaller plots? One reason is that if we don't engage, we'd fall short on the SDG goals if we leave these smallholder growers behind. Another reason is that these growers can store plenty more carbon. And to give an example of increasing above ground biomass, last year we distributed more than 200,000 shade trees to growers, or to put it another way, using the ex-ante method, we've removed perhaps 2,000 tons of CO2 per annum. Today, it's unclear when and if growers with these shade trees could tap into carbon credit payments. With respect to soil carbon capture, as mentioned, we're undertaking 55,000 soil samples with soil carbon measurement for each one. We should ask ourselves, what steps can we take to verify this data to create a solid carbon storage baseline before remeasuring in, say, 5 years' time? That's the end of my presentation. Thanks again for the invite. For those who've listened and know some of the answers or have suggestions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Max, for this very sobering presentation. I think the example of Francine that you highlighted is reflective of a lot of the cases and the million of farmers that I think Martin has mentioned at the beginning, and that the Food Systems Summit is trying also to put the spotlight on. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our second farmer, Mr. Andres Blaquet. Andres is a livestock and agricultural production engineer and holds a BSc in zootechnics from the Catholic University of Argentina. In September 1983, he joined Ledesma, where he started from the bottom, setting up fences, driving the tractors. In 1989, he was appointed as director of the Livestock and Agricultural Business Unit of Ledesma, a 111-year-old Argentinian group of agri-food companies with a strong focus on long-term sustainability, a pioneer company in integrating biodiversity management as a core aspect of its operations. So, Andres, we heard the very interesting presentation of Max, who shared with us the great story of Francine. Can you also share with us some stories from Ledesma's work on soil health? Over to you.
Bueno, antes que nada, muchas gracias por haberme invitado, especialmente a David Griso y al FMO. Les voy a contar el caso de un campo, de un farm, que tiene el grupo Ledesma, que tiene 100.000 hectáreas de campos en producción entre caña, frutas y el negocio agropecuario, que es el que manejo yo. En particular voy a hablarles de uno en donde se logró integrar la matriz ambiental con la sostenibilidad económica en un caso muy particular. Este es un campo, next please. Este es un campo que está ubicado, como ven en el mapa, al norte de la capital de Argentina, que es Buenos Aires, y tiene una extensión de 26.800 hectáreas. De esas hectáreas, 11.300 se dedican a la agricultura y 14.000 se dedican a la ganadería, dentro de las cuales hay 5.500 hectáreas de montes nativos, vírgenes, que nosotros los cuidamos como si fuera un parque nacional. Es decir, monitoreamos la flora y la fauna y solamente trabajamos dentro de ellos, cuidando, no podemos aplicar agroquímicos, ni podemos hacer uso de fuego, es decir, tenemos que mantenerlos impolutos. Siguiente, por favor. Esta es una zona de una gran torrencialidad, o sea, lluvias de 1.200 milímetros por año, que es mucho, es subtropical, con torrencialidades de 70 milímetros en media hora, que se producen 5 veces por década. Son suelos muy arcillosos, con muy poca estructura y son casi impermeables. Tienen además un relieve ondulado, con una pendiente promedio del 2.5%. La infiltración, o sea, la cantidad de agua que toman es tan poca que el 60% del agua escurre generando una presión hidráulica descomunal, que cuando uno hace agricultura puede llegar a tener pérdidas de 30 toneladas por hectárea y por año de tierra, o 60, eso es cuando se siembra en directa, o de 60 toneladas cuando se hacían trabajos mediante laboreo, o sea, con movimiento de suelo. La exploración de las raíces es de solamente 1 metro y hay muy poca agua útil porque solamente sostiene 90 milímetros en ese metro. El carbono elemento es elevado, en los primeros 20 centímetros tenemos 70 toneladas de carbono elemento, y como se mineraliza aproximadamente el 5%, perdemos 3.500 de carbono elemento por año que los tenemos que restituir de alguna manera con cultivos. Fíjense a la izquierda en la foto cómo es el tipo de erosión que se produce. Eso se produce en 1 año solamente. Y cuando uno lo corrige, mediante laboreos mecánicos, pierde el horizonte A, que es la foto que se ve a la derecha, en donde ya no existe el suelo. Directamente ya no se produce más. El suelo queda decapitado. Siguiente, por favor. Lo que hicimos para bajar de 30 y 60 toneladas de pérdida por hectárea y por año fueron terrazas sembrables. Construimos en 20.000 hectáreas de campo, por supuesto no las que tienen monte, hicimos 270 kilómetros de camino y 3.000 kilómetros de terrazas, que son como unos caminos que cortan la pendiente por donde corre el agua arrastrando la tierra. Con eso logramos pasar a una pérdida de solo 3 toneladas por hectárea y por año. Lo primero que teníamos que hacer era cortar la erosión, y con esto lo conseguimos porque es lo que se restituye por año el suelo, 3 toneladas por hectárea y por año. Siguiente, por favor. El segundo paso fue ver dónde estaban las zonas agrícolas más productivas y verificar que en esas zonas era mejor hacer agricultura, pero no en las marginales. Por eso pasamos 5.000 hectáreas de hectáreas agrícolas a hectáreas de pasturas, que son las que se ven en el color amarillo. Con eso conseguimos no solamente frenar la erosión, sino mejorar el resultado económico, tanto en la parte amarilla como en la parte azul, que se reservó las mejores hectáreas agrícolas. Siguiente, por favor. El desafío número 3 fue que en la parte agrícola existiera fotosíntesis los 365 días del año, o sea, captura de dióxido de carbono atmosférico más nitrógeno atmosférico. Y entonces empezamos a sembrar entre un cultivo de verano y el otro cuando no sembrábamos trigo, sembrábamos lo que llamábamos cultivos de servicios, que son gramíneas y leguminosas que sirven para hacer sombra en todo el invierno y evitar el uso de agroquímicos, de herbicidas, pero que además capturan dióxido de carbono y aumentan la materia orgánica, lo mismo que capturan nitrógeno atmosférico y reducen el uso de fertilizantes fósiles. Bueno, empezamos con hacer esta práctica que además pasó las 3 toneladas de pérdida de suelo que teníamos a 0, con lo cual las terrazas combinadas con esta práctica hicieron que la erosión se convirtiera en 0. Además empezamos a usar esta superficie con ganadería, con lo cual al tener las pasturas una producción 5 veces menor en invierno que en verano, logramos con esto aumentar la curva de pasto en invierno y producir una cantidad 5 veces mayor, prácticamente 5 veces mayor de carne en la parte, digamos, en la parte de pasturas combinada con la agricultura. Ahora vamos a ver la producción. Next, please. Este es el suelo, cómo pasaba el invierno antes, aún con terrazas totalmente descubierto, y abajo se ve cómo se pasa ahora, con cultivos que lo cubren durante todo el invierno, y se matan solamente antes de sembrar el cultivo que sigue. Adelante. Next, please. Este es un cultivo de avena, de cobertura, en el invierno. No llega el sol a la tierra y por lo tanto no hay malezas, y esto, si se utiliza prudentemente con la ganadería, produce 120 kilos de carne por hectárea y por año, que son gratis para el sistema ganadero, porque al evitar el uso de agroquímicos se abarató la cuenta de la hectárea agrícola con esta práctica. Next, please. A la izquierda pueden ver una raíz de una leguminosa con nódulos donde se concentra el nitrógeno atmosférico que pasa a la tierra, y a la derecha se puede ver una raíz en cabellera que cuando el cultivo muere y le deja lugar al cultivo de verano, le deja galerías cuyo espacio se rellena con agua y con aire, favoreciendo, junto con el residuo que queda en superficie, aumenta los rendimientos de los cultivos de verano un 15% por menor evaporación y mayor infiltración. Adelante. Next, please. Acá se ve Hacienda comiendo muy livianamente porque tenemos que mantener el sombreado. Así que, digamos, la Hacienda come en el invierno, que era cuando no había pasto, y ahora podemos tener la misma cantidad de Hacienda en invierno que en verano porque usamos la parte agrícola para sostener esos animales que antes no teníamos dónde ponerlos. Adelante. Bueno, como resumen de producción, producimos 50.000 toneladas de grano, pero pasamos de 2 millones de kilos de carne vacuna a producir 6 millones de kilos de carne vacuna con un costo muy bajo del kilo producido. Cuando vemos la captura de dióxido de carbono, triplicamos la cantidad de dióxido de carbono que capturamos con la agricultura cuando le agregamos los cultivos de servicio, ¿no? Y tenemos capturas también muy importantes en el área de pasturas, que creció cuando sacamos las áreas de menor producción agrícola. La cantidad de toneladas que nosotros estamos capturando en este momento de dióxido de carbono son 66.270. Es decir, es un sistema en donde hemos logrado bajar la toxicidad por menor aplicación de agroquímicos, aumentar, como se puede ver ahí, a una tasa de crecimiento de 1.4% de aumento en la parte de agricultura con cultivo de servicio y de 2.5% de aumento de la materia orgánica por año. Estamos aumentando la captura de carbono y llevándola a la materia orgánica del suelo, evitando el uso de fertilizantes fósiles o reduciéndolos, y hemos logrado bajar la toxicidad por unidad de producto, la toxicidad aplicada por unidad de producto, en los últimos 30 años, 70 veces. Es decir, hoy los alimentos son muchísimo más sanos que hace 30 años. Con esto hemos atacado todas las variables ambientales y además hemos generado un modelo muy competitivo para adelante, con lo cual le podemos dar sostenibilidad en el futuro a este modelo de producción que ya se ha replicado, y estas 20.000 hectáreas en Uruguay y en la Argentina ya son aproximadamente 400.000, con el modelo que se desarrolló en este campo. Bueno, eso es todo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Andres, for this very interesting presentation. Again, I think now we have already heard from different speakers, and I think that to close this first part of this discussion, I would like to give the floor to Christine Doherty, VP Global Sustainable Agriculture and Responsible Sourcing from PepsiCo. In her capacity, Christine drives PepsiCo's short-term approach and long-term strategic direction to deliver transformation and innovation through sustainable and responsible sourcing solutions. She leads the sustainable sourcing and agricultural teams to deliver against relevant PepsiCo Performance with Purpose 2025 goals. Christine, I think everybody knows PepsiCo. Tell us how PepsiCo is driving action on sustainability and soil health on the ground, and how are you engaging farmers into this work? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. And we're honored to join the many distinguished speakers. As you indicated, PepsiCo's business starts with the earth. A steady, sustainable supply of crops, potatoes, oats, corn, citrus is central to our business. We source over 25 crops in nearly 60 countries and support more than 100,000 agricultural jobs. We recognize that agriculture presents one of the greatest opportunities to address climate change, biodiversity, societal challenges. And so that's why we are helping to support regenerative agriculture practices that make soil healthier, sequester carbon, improve watersheds, improve biodiversity, and strengthen farmer livelihoods. In April, we launched our impact-driven PepsiCo Positive Ambition. That's made up of 3 pillars. First, spreading the adoption of regenerative farming practices over 7 million acres. That's about the size of our footprint. With this, we estimate a net reduction of at least 3 million tons of carbon emissions. 2, improve the livelihoods of more than 250,000 people in our agricultural supply chain, specifically looking to empower more women and minority farmers. And then 3rd, continue to sustainably source our key ingredients. Those items such as potatoes, corn, and oats, but also looking at vegetable oils and grains. But we know, as we've just heard, farmers are business people. The economic piece is absolutely critical. We cannot expect them to make changes without taking on additional risk. And that's why we're discussing with all of the partners here today, how do we help mitigate that risk? For PepsiCo, some of the examples we're doing in the US, we're working with farmers to cost share, so to encourage them to take on practices such as planting cover crops, alternative tillage, reducing the amount of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizer needed when they promote regenerative practices. Our demonstration farms are another example where we support peer-to-peer, farmer-to-farmer learning. We have over 350 farms globally, and we noticed that with these farms and encouraging education and other partners, those farmers are adopting regenerative farming practices. These are systemic challenges, and no one organization can tackle them alone. That's why we believe it's critical to partner with others in the food system to find and implement shared solutions. We also know that we need to have common metrics, common language. So when we're speaking about regenerative agriculture, we understand what we're talking about amongst ourselves. We need clear guidance on how to report and track in order to scale these practices. We know that regenerative agriculture is a way we can create value all along the food system for our business, for farmers' businesses, for our planet. Today, we're optimistic about the progresses and opportunities, and we know that we must create resiliency in order to scale these and address these challenges. That's why at PepsiCo, we're excited to partner with the many entities that are on this call today, and we look forward to the challenge. Thank you. Back over to you.
Thank you, Christine. And I love that you remind us that the farmers are businesses and private sector entities and the importance of partnerships. So ladies and gentlemen, we have heard today from a UN representative, from business organization, from private companies, the farmers, the policymakers, the DFIs who are underlying the importance of soil health, the need for partnership, that it made sense also from a business sense, from an environmental sense, for nutrition. Maybe before we close this event, we have the opportunity to take a couple of questions, and I will selectively pick a couple of them from the chat. I see a first question for Max. Max, the question to you was, would you have similar cases from value chains that are mainly serving local or regional markets? And there is also a question for Andres. How come Ledesma was working on these things where the topic was not even popular or hot? So if I may, I would like to give you each maybe a couple of minutes to address these questions in a very succinct manner. Over to you, Max, and then Andres.
Thank you. Justin actually replied to it, but I've mentioned that one of the things I mentioned in the presentation is how do you leverage your cash flow, your assets, your presence, your people to do more for coffee growers, farmers in general. And that's been one of the focuses for us of late. We buy from 2% of people around a specific factory. There's lots of other farmers that we don't engage with. I think one of the emphasis should be put on aggregators and origin companies to look at what else they can do, both in terms of buying and creating a supply chain for off-takers, but also what can they supply in terms of products and services that will reduce the cost of living. So, we're now grain buyers, maize buyers, and flour producers on our side. We also import wholesale commodities for sale to growers to reduce their cost of living.
Thank you very much, Max. Andres, over to you. Give us the secret of Ledesma.
En Argentina es muy importante no depender del Estado, porque el Estado no soluciona ningún problema, sino complica a las empresas. Entonces, nosotros que producimos papel del bagazo de la caña, éramos grandes consumidores de gas natural. Entonces, para independizarnos, no solamente del uso del gas natural, sino del Estado, empezamos a reemplazar el gas natural por hojas de caña que las quemamos en calderas para poder usar energía renovable, pero fundamentalmente para evitar comprarle gas al Estado. Lo mismo pasó con el uso de la electricidad. Nosotros regamos los cañaverales, los podríamos regar tomando el agua y vertiéndola directamente en los campos. Sin embargo, el agua se toma de las montañas y hemos construido usinas hidroeléctricas para evitar comprarles electricidad al Estado. En Argentina es una cuestión de seguridad primero, pero por supuesto hay un tema de sostenibilidad ecológica y de competitividad de costos. Así que lo mismo pasa con el tema de los cultivos de cobertura. Es más barato es más barato producir una hectárea de maíz o de soja o de trigo usando cultivos de cobertura que usando agroquímicos. Es decir, ha sido la combinación de dos cosas enriquecedoras, por decirlo. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Andres. We have time for one question to Lee, but Lee, I'll ask you to give us a 30-second response. So the question is, change also requires a paradigm shift, an intrinsic motivation for farmers to change their usual business towards regenerative and or organic practices. How can we, as multi-stakeholder coalition, provide easy access to knowledge and education for the smallholder farmers and mid-sized farmers? Over to you.
Okay, that's a bit unfair because that's a huge question, but I think one is a change in behavior is needed from all of us. Scientists need to be willing to adapt and to open our data, share our data, and also communicate it in a way that is accessible to everyone. So I think really everyone just being open to shift our behaviors for the better. Thanks.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you very much for being concise. I know it's a very difficult story. And again, just to borrow Martin's word, this is the beginning of a conversation. So I invite us to continue these conversations by that free. So ladies and gentlemen, it has been a very exciting discussion so far. I think by now we all have understood the commitment of the different panelists and speakers that we had to do the issue of soil health. To close this event, we couldn't think of better speakers than our two next experts who will be taking the floor to share with us their words of wisdom. I will slightly deviate from the program because, you know, we need to be flexible, and there's a time constraint that I need to accommodate. So I would like to first actually give the floor to Dr. Ratan Lal. Dr. Ratan is a PhD and the recipient of the 2020 World Food Prize. He's a distinguished professor of soil science and director of the Carbon Management and Sequestration Center at the Ohio State University and adjunct professor at the University of Islands and Punjab Agricultural University. So Dr. Ratan, to conclude this event, we're keen to hear from you and your conclusions. So over to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Thoraya. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can perfectly hear you.
Thank you so much, first of all, to you and to the Rabobank and all the speakers. I am very optimistic today of what I heard. I must say that there was a tremendous goodwill support for soil health and its management. And I would also like to make very specific comment to Martin and to Agnes, that this is a great opportunity. UN Food Systems Summit provides us a great opportunity to put the sustainable development goals back on the track. As you know, they are not right now. 691 million people were hungry in 2019. 811 million are hungry now. The forecast is that there will be more than 830 hungry by 2030. We can still rectify this situation, and you can do it. Another reason why we need to take positive action immediately, right from COP21 in Paris in 2015, when they launched the 4 per 1,000 program on soil carbon sequestration, to COP22 in Marrakesh, where they launched adapting African agriculture, to COP25, where they launched platform of climate action on agriculture in Latin America, and ECA launching the Living Soil program. Each one of them have taken action on soil health. It's an opportunity not to miss in the Food Systems Summit coming up on 23rd of September. There are many other reasons why it needs to be done. I mentioned food security, malnutrition, as Martin, you already mentioned, many billion people can't afford healthy food. More than 2 billion people still remain malnourished because they have no access to healthy food. The food they consumed is grown on depleted and degraded soil, devoid of micronutrients, 17 of them. And good food is a good medicine. And that is why we need to take action. Climate, 1.1 degrees centigrade warming already. I'm afraid if we do not take action, more than 2 degrees will happen soon. But we have an opportunity to put almost 180 gigaton of carbon in soil between now and 2100, and another 150 to 160 gigaton in vegetation, 330 gigaton to be put back in the terrestrial biosphere. That's a drawdown of atmospheric CO2 of more than 150 parts per million. If we can take action on finding non-carbon fuel sources and implement terrestrial carbon sequestration, climate change keeping within 2 degrees centigrade is still within our reach. You can do it, Martin and Agnes, but not missing this opportunity. Water security, water quality, water renewability, mass extinction, deforestation tropical to the size of Sri Lanka every year. The solution to all those lie in soil health. More than 2 billion hectares of soil degraded, depleted, polluted, and we take it for granted. I think the private sector has shown today, along with many letters from the government that have been forwarded to you and Agnes, it's obvious there's a strong support for this that we have never seen before. And finally, I'd like to leave 3 messages, which are very specific. Number 1, famines, which are increasing, are in fact man-made tragedies. We must make famine and mass starvation politically intolerable, morally toxic, ethically unthinkable, and humanly unacceptable through restoration of soil health. Number 2, soil stewardship and care must be embedded in every fruit and vegetable eaten, in each grain ground into the bread consumed, in every cup of water used, in every breath of air inhaled, in every scenic landscape cherished. And number 3, therefore, please Martin, please Agnes, it is time to take a positive action by endorsing Coalition for Action on Soil Health, to promote the mantra that good soil health is equal to good food, is equal to good human health, is equal to good ecosystem, is good planetary processes. The time to take action is now, on 23rd of September. I look forward to hearing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lar, for this very passionate call of action. I think Martin heard you, we all heard you loud and clear, so thank you very much. Our second speaker to deliver concluding remarks is Mr. João Campari, who is the Global Food Practice Leader of WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. In his role, he oversees WWF work across food systems in over 100 countries, including in production, consumption, and loss and waste, integrating into the organization's nature and climate mission. João is also the chair of the UN Food Systems Summit Action 3, boosting nature-based production at scale. João, the final words would be for you. As a conservationist, how important is soil to you, to your organization, to your work? Can we achieve food, climate, and nature goals without healthy soil? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Look, delighted to be here. And thanks for the Ratan, listening to Ratan in his concluding remarks. It's always a challenge to surpass him. This is about a partnership. So thank you very much, Ratan, for your concluding remarks, which I will only be briefly adding a few points. When we talk about soil, we immediately think of it as a factor of production whose only service is to produce food. And when we talk about soil management, we treat it as if its only function is to maximize yields. But as Ratan, in his inspiring words, reminded us, soil is not only a factor of production, it's a living ecosystem that supports life on Earth, including our own. In fact, soil, in my view, is our most valuable environmental asset with its own intrinsic value. It's an asset, actually, that delivers multiple essential services, which include, but it's not restricted to food production. And we must start treating it as an environmental asset. Soil provides a habitat to countless organisms. In fact, about a quarter of all life on Earth can be found beneath our feet. Soils store around 80% of carbon in terrestrial ecosystems. This is about 2 to 3 times more carbon than we find in the atmosphere. Just a single hectare of healthy soil has the potential to store and filter enough water for 1,000 people. And of course, healthy soil is a rich source of nitrogen, phosphorus, and freshwater retention, all key elements for food production. In fact, over 95% of our food production depends on healthy soils. However, 52% of farmland is degraded. Soils are unhealthy and either underperforming or unproductive in these places. And with business as usual, land degradation over the next 25 years could potentially reduce food productivity by 12% and drive up food prices by at least 30%. Less healthy soil doesn't just reduce yields, it also forecasts to reduce nutrition density in certain crops. So we would have less food and of lower quality with lower soil health. This degradation has been driven by unsustainable farming methods, the overuse of fertilizers, pesticides, over-tillage, and a lack of crop rotation. We urgently need to adopt nature-positive production practices at scale to ensure we have healthy soils that can help us meet nature, climate, and social development goals. We must move away from a model of extracting from nature to produce food to farming with nature, from short-term thinking about maximizing yields to planning in an integrated manner and accounting for many environmental and social benefits healthy soils provide. Regenerative agriculture in this context is key to ensuring soil health and long-term food security and provide environmental and social benefits for all. There is already evidence that regenerative practices can be applied at scale and rival or surpass monoculture production in terms of yields in the long run, as well as nutrient density, supporting nature and benefiting livelihoods of farmers. So we need more regenerative practices, more agrobiodiversity, more innovation, more farming with nature instead of against it. Farmers need to be incentivized to adopt these practices. I hope to see the public and private sectors coming together to support farmers in transitioning to more nature-positive production, without compromising, of course, the human right to safe, healthy, and nutritious food. This requires the repurposing of agri-food support and subsidies to reward farmers for producing food that is healthy for people and planet. Over the past year, Action Track 3 has gathered ideas from across the food systems and brought them together, multiple stakeholders, to form multi-stakeholder coalitions of action to improve soil health globally. The Global Soil Hub aims to facilitate the adoption and scaling of soil health with outcomes for growth, productivity, livelihoods, climate, and nature. Soil health underpins many of the solutions blossoming in the action tracks. For instance, increasing agrobiodiversity, sustainable livestock, restoring grasslands and savannas, all of which enhance and depend on soil health. This coalition is gaining traction, and I sincerely hope it will be recognized next week in the Food System Summit. I encourage all of you to join the summit event next week, and particularly join the Global Soil Hub being led by Ratan and Lee here in this panel, and join the Soil Hub Coalition and commit your actions to leveraging it. This coalition will live long beyond the summit. Be part of this movement. It's a positive one for the change we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zhao. Again, a very passionate call for action. So with the words of wisdom from Zhao, we have reached actually the end of our program. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the passionate call for action, the good intervention from our speakers who are all committed, be it private sector players, be it development finance institution, UN system, policymakers, researchers, civil society, farmers. I think today the message was very clear that soil health is important for our planet, for our future, for our food, for our economies, and that we definitely need to invest and accelerate action. So on behalf of the organizers, I would like to start first by thanking our speakers for making the time to join us, to share their commitment, to share with us more about their work and their action on the ground in order to push forward this agenda. I think we also agree that the Food System Summit is an unprecedented opportunity. Martin, no pressure. I think the level of expectation is extremely high. So thank you. We are on a Friday afternoon, and when I see the level of engagement from the speakers, from the audience, I'm really happy and quite convinced, as Dr. Lal, that we will make it happen together. Before I close, I would like also to thank you on behalf of the also of IFAD. It has been my pleasure to moderate this session. And I would like also to thank both David and Thijs from Rabobank, who've been working with me behind the scene to organize this event and make sure that everything works smoothly. Also, big thank you to Giovanni, who's been managing the technical aspects. So I would like to wish you all a very good weekend. Thank you again for your time and interest, and invite you to join us in this action and give you an invitation. Please register to the Food System Summit if you haven't done it yet. Please make sure that your voice is heard and that together we really leverage on this unprecedented effect to make a change in our Food System Summit. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and hope to see you soon in another event.